Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Andrew Gustafson.
And I'm Cindy Vandenbosch.
And we want to welcome you to today's virtual program. I see we have a lot of returning visitors, so thank you so much. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. As people start to join, we're just going to go over a couple very quick housekeeping things. We are testing out a new solution for closed captioning. So it's down at the bottom of the screen. You turn it on and off just like you normally would, but these are actually automated captions.
So you'll see it says closed caption at the bottom of the screen, and there's a caret just to the right. And so you can pull that up and it either says hide subtitles or you can show subtitles.
Yep.
And so that's how you access the live streaming service.
So we know that they're delayed, a second or two. But we don't have someone furiously typing away behind the scenes anymore. So we'll see how this works. This is just the second time that we're using this. The other thing is that we would love to hear your questions and comments, and you can share those in the chat. Just remember, in the chat, you can select all panelists, in which case just me and Cindy and Stefan, who's producing today, will see it. Or you can select all panelists and attendees, in which case everybody who's in the session will be able to see it. We really encourage you, this is a topic that has touched so many people, so many families. We've had the honor to host so many people that worked or served at the Brooklyn Navy Yard during World War II. So if you have stories like that you'd like to share, please drop them into the chat and we'll incorporate them into our conversation. Also, I just wanted to mention a few things that are coming up. So today we're kind of kicking off a series that we're going to be doing over the next couple of months, because normally we would be doing a whole host of events around the city to celebrate 75 years since the end of World War II. But since we can't do that in person, we're putting together this virtual series. And so today marks the official end of the war, VJ Day, and so that's why we decided to do this topic. But we have a few more programs related coming up, and we're going to be adding more to the calendar. So just bear with me for 1 second, and let me pull this up. We have coming up on Tuesday, we're going to be going to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, but we're going to be talking about what's going on there today. We're going to meet with Judd of Grandchamps, and he's going to show us what they do there at Building 77 in the Food Manufacturing Hub. Then on Wednesday, we're bringing back Howard Goldstein, who we had him on Earth Day back in April, talking about the forest ecology. Next week, we're going to be talking about some specific trees around Prospect Park, and we're going to do a little field trip and get up close virtually with them. Then on the 23rd, I've mentioned this on a few programs before, how I've taken up sort of paper crafting during the pandemic. And so we're going to take a look at probably the biggest paper doll maker of the 19th and early 20th century, a company based in Epinal, France, and we're actually going to have a scholar of 19th century French art come on, Dr. Asa Rexer. Then on the 27th, we're marking Brooklyn Battle Day, looking at some of the Revolutionary War sites at Prospect Park. And then on the 31st, we're going to have on the National Lighthouse Museum on Staten Island. But then on the 2nd, which in America is actually VJ Day. So today sort of marks the day after, because of the international dateline, that the Japanese officially surrendered to end World War II. September 2nd is when the surrender documents were actually signed in Tokyo Bay. So there's a lot of different dates that are used for the quote-unquote end of World War II. Some places it's August 14th, some places it's the 15th, some places it's September 2nd. And then September 6th is the birthday of the Brooklyn Army Terminal. So we're going to look at the World War II history there and listen to some oral histories as well. And then September 19th, we have this really special program. Our friend Teresa Lung made a film a couple of years ago about her father, who was a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II. And so we're going to do a special screening and conversation about her film, Every Day is a Holiday. And then lastly, real quick, before we dive into the program, all of this is supported through our membership program. So we want to thank so much our members who are joining us today. If you want to continue to support this program, and we've now done 125 programs, and that's through your support. So you can sign up for a monthly membership on our website. There's different levels of membership, and you get access to different parts of our archive and other kind of members-only events and discounts. So just go to turnstiletours.com/membership. All right, so we're going to dive into today's topic. Oral history is something that's so important to the work that we do, and it's really done so much to bring the Brooklyn Navy Yard to life. Our understanding of the place, the stories we tell about the place, just really wouldn't exist without the oral histories, because there's so much that's missing from the official records, right? And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is how these people, through telling and sharing their stories, have really helped to bring this place to life.
It's really helped with our storytelling at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, really from the beginning. So we've been doing the programs at the Brooklyn Navy Yard for over 10 years. And oral histories were a big part of that right from the get-go. You learned so much about what it felt like, what it smelled like, how people felt in their jobs, the relationships they had with people. And so we're hoping to share as many stories as we can with you today, directly from people who were interviewed about their experiences as either defense workers or people whose ships came into the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
Yeah, and we should mention that the process of collecting these oral histories has been going on now for many, many years, and sort of was in stops and starts. You know, it sort of kicked off back in 1989, which is when the Brooklyn Historical Society held an event where they invited a number of female industrial workers from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and they did an oral history with them. And then over time, other interviews were done, but it really kicked off in earnest in 2007. And we want to acknowledge a number of people that really helped to create this collection. One of them is Jennifer Egan. So we actually interviewed her back in May. And when she started working on her book, Manhattan Beach, in 2007, she approached the then vice president of archives. What was her title? Exhibits and Archives.
Yeah, she spearheaded the museum, basically.
So
Danielle Romano.
Yeah, Danielle Romano, who really, you know, was the driving force behind creating Building 92. She worked with Jennifer to really start to kick off collecting more of these oral histories. And then, of course, Sadie Sullivan, who at the time was the oral historian at the Brooklyn Historical Society, also started to collect them. So we really start to see more and more being collected in 2007, in part as well because more and more people of this generation were passing away. And so we wanted to capture those stories. Then, you know, we started doing tours in 2008. And we also became kind of wrapped up in this project because we were getting people who were coming on the tours and saying, oh, I worked at the Yard in the past, or I have a family member who did. And so the tours really helped to bring people out of the woodwork. And so a lot of the people that we're going to hear today, that, you know, they first kind of came on a tour and then we were able to sit down with them and collect their oral history. So the public outreach with the tours, but also just with the existence of the Museum and Visitor Center has really helped the collection to grow. And it's changed our tours so much. Mm-hmm. We always say that if you come on a tour of the Navy Yard once and then you come 6 months later, it's a completely different tour. And a big part of that is because we're learning things, because on almost every tour we have someone who comes who has a personal connection to the place. And sometimes that kind of sparks our curiosity to go, you know, search out something that somebody mentioned, or it's something that was, you know, completely kind of blew us away and changed our perspective on a particular story or particular place or aspect of the Yard's history. Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and get through as many of these as we can. We have about a dozen different people that we're going to highlight. So we might go a little past the hour mark. But we really want you to listen to their voices. So we're going to set up these clips and give you a little bit of background information on these people. But we really want to put their voices front and center. And we're going to start by talking about people coming to the Yard in World War II, how the Yard was really transformed. You know, before the war, it actually started to grow a little bit. There was a lot of investment in the New Deal. to kind of improve and renovate the yard. But we went from about 25,000 people all the way up to over 70,000 in a very short period of time. And so you have new groups of people that are coming to work in the yard. And so we have a number of different voices that we're going to hear that highlight some of those new groups of people and the just tremendous growth of the workforce in a very short period of time. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about the yard more than doubling its employment in such a short period of time. Mm-hmm. And in the case of the first gentleman that we're going to be hearing from today, this was Anthony Ferreira, and his family lived in Little Italy. So they were a family of Italian immigrants, and they had a restaurant down on Coney Island, which was seasonal. And so he'd work there seasonally and then look for other jobs. And he was able to get a job on Sand Street at what then was called the Oval Bar and Grill. And there happened to be the assistant to the commandant who sat in his section, and he was waiting his table and chatted with him day after day. And Anthony mentioned that he felt downhearted that he couldn't serve in the war because he had a hearing loss in one of his ears. And so he wasn't able to enlist. And this Charles Baker from the Brooklyn Navy Yard asked him if he would like to work in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And so he got his job at a dine, really the offer came to him through being a waiter just outside the gates and the Sand Street gate. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is not a picture of the Sand Street gate. This is actually the Cumberland gate. However, I use this picture because you can clearly see one of the Marine Guards right here. So this picture is from 1942. And Anthony is going to explain his interaction with the Marine Guards.
And right before we play that, in terms of his job, he was one of these unique people that was interviewed who had the opportunity to move across the Brooklyn Navy Yard. He was a fire warden, so he would make sure that there were proper kind of procedures in place across the yard wherever there was welding happening. Mm-hmm. So here he's talking about coming into the gate and his interaction with the Marines.
Yep.
So you would come in at the Sand Street gate?
Yeah, Sand Street gate, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And was there security there?
Oh, yeah.
What kind of security?
Security there was that when you brought your luncheon, anything that holds liquid, you had to open the front of them, there was coffee, and they wanted to see no alcohol of any sorts, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And now they were Marines security at the gate.
Oh, it was Marines at the gate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So as you pass, thousands of people going there, right? Now you had to stop, right?
Everybody had to stop?
Yeah, if you're carrying something.
Right.
You had to be stopped. Mm-hmm. They had to look. Mm-hmm. And there was sandwiches, stuff like that, they know. But anything that contained liquid, they had to open it and smell it. Mm-hmm. You know what? I resented that. They asked me why.
Why?
Because at winter time, it was winter time, right? And some of them, you could see dripping sometimes. They were so cold. I don't know and they were, and maybe, I don't know.
Their noses
I don't know. Sometimes, I'm just saying this.
Yeah.
They would do that. Unintentionally,
Right.
Then you put their nose down, say the temperature container, right?
Yeah.
So not to smell the head, not to smell, you can't smell it outside. You have to put it close, right? To smell this, if it contains any beverage of sorts.
Right. Oh, and then they get it all germy.
so that many times, so then, I noticed that I said, we allowed them we no liquid. We went, I forget now how we got the liquids, how we got the liquid coffee and stuff like that at the yard. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. So what's the next one?
So Yeah, definitely not practicing social distancing if your nose is dripping into someone else's coffee. But this is actually one of those stories. We actually mentioned this back in May, the program we did with Jennifer Egan. We didn't play the clip, but that was something that's actually incorporated into the book. And that was one of the things I loved about reading the book, which is that almost everything that happens in the book that's not related to the plot in the Navy Yard, I could name the person that it happened to. So it's really kind of taken right out of these oral histories. And in that program, we listened to a lot of the women workers, because obviously that's the core of the story. But that was one of the things we wanted to do in this program as well, was, you know, listen to some of the other ones that didn't get included back in May.
And you had the opportunity on one of the tours, right, to play this oral history to a guy who had served in the Marines at the Sand Street Gate, right? Like,
Phil D'Amato. He was actually a Marine Guard, so he was kind of on the other side of this interaction. He was at the Yard a little bit later in the early 1950s. But yeah, that's one of the really cool things. And we'll see this as well in some of these other stories, is that these little anecdotes pop up in multiple different stories from people. And that, you know, it's sort of like corroboration, but it also, you know, really helps to kind of bring the place to life. So we're going to listen to Mimi Leipzig, and she's going to talk about, you know, women being recruited and what she had to go through to actually get a job in the Yard. You know, just for context, obviously, you know, the women who worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard are now become famous as of the women workers of World War II, this so-called Rosie the Riveters. At the peak of the Yard's employment, of that 70,000 workers, about 5,000 of them were female industrial workers, and then there are about another 5,000 women doing other jobs in the Yard that weren't what were called production jobs, but they were doing other things. And so Mimi talks about, you know, trying to get one of these production jobs. Yeah.
And her family, so her parents emigrated from the Pale of Russia. So she grew up in Brooklyn, and her father had a pharmacy right across from the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital. And she dropped out of school, saw an ad in the paper for a mechanical aptitude test to work at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So we're going to hear about that.
The Navy Yard was giving this mechanical aptitude test, and I did very well. And they taught us how to weld, how to tack weld, and they taught us how to do various things. We had a training course. And they sent us to work in the Navy Yard because they needed assistants, ship fitters. My job was a ship fitters assistant. Mm-hmm. So that this was really you would jump at it. Seeing this, I said, of course, you know, I jumped at it. I thought it would be great. And besides, I was so proud that I could do those kind of things. I knew I could do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I took the test. And the other girls that worked with me were, very few were, I guess most of them weren't even like each other. I don't know how much of a similarity there was among the girls, you know. They were all each one was a little different from the other, mm-hmm. in many, many ways, in background and everything else. And of course we shared the fact that we didn't know what the hell was going on. And we walked into this building. A ship fitter's shop has a steel floor. And I guess because they have a lot of tack welding, I'm not sure, but I think that must be the reason, there is always chipping hammer. You know the sound that they when they work in the street? They go, ah.
Oh, yeah.
So I walked in there with this group of girls, and I hear this sound, and I say to myself, oh, well, this will go away. This will be fine. It won't happen. You know, it's just that you're repairing something. That's the sound of a ship fitting shop.
Oh, wow.
So you live there that way. And what happens is you get a little deaf while you're there.
There's so many things I love about that. Obviously, like you were saying before, Cindy, the sound, the kind of sensory environment that you can't get just from reading a newspaper, right? But the other part is she talks about the diversity of the people, of the women that were coming to work. And that's one of the things we've talked about before, which is that what made World War II different wasn't that women worked in factories, because women have always worked in factories. What was different was that white, middle class, many college educated women came to work in factories. And so it was this sort of, melting pot, bringing these people from all different kind of strata of New York City society coming together and working in these shops. And so obviously women made a huge contribution to the war effort, and this was a big change for the Navy to be employing women. But another big change was that more and more opportunities were opened up for African Americans to come and work in the yard. And so a person who has such a great story and is such a great storyteller is Clarence Irving. And so Clarence is going to talk a little bit about, we're going to play two clips. First is about, why it was so important for him to be able to get a job there. And then he's going to talk about the actual working conditions and contrasting it with working in other factories around New York City.
My name is Clarence L. Irving, Sr. If you take a look at the statistics of the 30s and 40s, best opportunity at that time for African Americans was to try and work for the federal government. In 1944, I got this call from the Navy, and they told me to report to the New York Naval Shipyard.
Oops.
Oop.
And he worked in the Navy Yard. They had all kind of exhaust fans to take out smoke, to take out dust. It was like working in paradise. And then on top of that, you had lockers. Because you could go in there with a white suit and change your suit, working grease up to your ears all day, go and take a nice shower, put your white suit on, nobody knew where you worked. You couldn't do that in most factories. So they had the most up-to-date equipment, and something was wrong. There was always a first aid person there. It was just an unbelievable place for people who had worked under some of the terrible conditions. Don't forget, you had terrible factories in New York City, awful fires and explosions. You didn't have that kind of thing in the Navy. And the Navy Yard was beautiful. I mean, the sidewalks were like Park Avenue on, yes, I mean, beautiful. All of those streets that you see, just as clean as, it was unbelievable. Once you walked in that gate, you were in a different world. Mm-hmm. Because they were inspected by the upper echelon, and not only that, they had good cafeterias. It was just a whole people when they knew that they had to go, but they regretted that they threw the war ended only because of the good treatment.
So. There's so much to unpack in that clip. First, he says it is like Park Avenue. There is a Park Avenue just one block from the Navy Yard, but I don't think that's the Park Avenue he was talking about that runs underneath the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. So by comparison to some of the factories he was working in, which he talks about, them basically being fire traps. The Brooklyn Navy Yard was much safer. And much cleaner. And of course, it's a matter of comparison, because we have other oral histories where people talk about how dangerous the work was, and how dirty or like how Mimi described it, how loud the Brooklyn Navy Yard was. But the other thing that he mentions is that people were sad to go, and of course we'll talk about later about when the Navy Yard. The condition of the Navy Yard at the end of the war, when they laid off the vast majority of the staff. Of course, the first people to go were often the last in. So that's the women and the African Americans, who also had fewer opportunities for advancement. So on the one hand, there was new opportunities given to people, but it was relatively short-lived. Most of these people were what were called unclassified employees, meaning they had a contract for the duration of the war plus 6 months. And in fact, for many people, it was much shorter than that. They started to, scale back already, by the time of VJ Day, pretty dramatically. Okay. Speaking of African Americans at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, this is a person that we had the opportunity to meet. So here's Cindy in 2011 with Robert Hammond at the opening of Building 92, which opened on Veterans Day 2011. And he, unlike Clarence Irving, he wasn't a civilian employee. He was an enlisted member of the Navy. While on the civilian side, they realized that they had this incredible need for labor, and so they needed to expand the labor pool. The same thing was the case for the military itself. There were a lot of limitations for African Americans serving in the Navy prior to World War II. They were basically shunted into particular ratings, which is your job in the Navy. So they were often stewards' mates. They're doing cooking, cleaning, really dangerous jobs like ammunition handling, construction battalions. So they were really limited in their ability to learn skills in the Navy. That started to change in 1943, and Robert Hammond became one of the very early medical corpsmen in the U.S. Navy who was African American. And so one of his assignments was actually to come to the Brooklyn Naval Hospital, but he served in other places as well.
Yeah.
He did his basic training at Naval Station Great Lakes, which is today still the boot camp of the U.S. Navy. But he also served with Marines down in, was it North Carolina?
Yeah, I'm on Fort Point in North Carolina, where there were Black Marines that were stationed there and shipped out from that location. So he went there after training at the Brooklyn Naval Hospital, which we're going to hear about here.
Yeah, and so he tells an incredible story about serving at the Naval Hospital, and we wish we could play just his whole oral history, but we're just going to play a clip of it. One of the things he experienced when arriving was that he and his other Black fellow corpsmen were treated like stewards' mates. So they were doing cooking and cleaning until someone said that, these are actually medical corpsmen. They're very highly trained, like they should be doing the job that they're trained to do. And I just see Maki shared that my father served in the U.S. Navy during World War II as a cook and a steward's mate. Thank you so much for sharing that. But here's a story that he tells about something he experienced that was really an eye-opening experience for him while he was actually, serving on one of the surgical wards at the Brooklyn Naval Hospital.
After a couple of weeks on the ward, we were sent over to surgery. And we learned surgical duties over there. And this is when I found out that the Navy segregated blood. 1 X on a pint of blood was for white, 2 X's was for black, 3 X's was for Native American Hispanics, 4 X's was for Oriental. Now blood is divided into A, B, AB, and O blood. And that's a blood type everybody has, one of those types. It's not segregated by racial distinction. And one day, I'm in surgery with a doctor, and they needed some A blood. They sent me down to get a bottle of A blood. He was operating on a white patient. I went down, I brought back a pint of blood, A blood, that had 2 X's on it. I didn't know about those X's then. And I gave it to the nurse. And she looked at it and dropped it on the floor. And it broke. And the doctor told her, "What did you drop that for?" She says, "You can't give that man a black man's blood." So the doctor said, "Go down there and get me another bottle of A blood. And make sure it's got 1 X on it." We can't afford to break blood around here. So I went down and brought it back up.
It's really, really incredible. And he goes on to talk about how this made him really think and go back and do some research and learned about this is basically complete nonsense. And he later learned that when Americans were in Great Britain and the British saw that the Americans were segregating the blood this way, that they thought it was completely preposterous. It's really amazing, and so you can also see the contrast there. People serving on the civilian side, in many cases, thought that they were kind of getting new opportunities, and they weren't. There was certainly discrimination, and there was segregation to a degree, but we have to remember that the military and especially the Navy was fully segregated during World War II. So kind of different experiences of people in uniform versus the people who are on the civilian side. So that's why I on my tours, I always try and play these two clips next to each other. But now we're going to move on to talk about some of the jobs that were done in the Navy Yard. Some people have made reference to them. We heard Mimi talk about chippers, and we heard talk about stewards, mates, and medical corpsmen. We're going to talk more about some of the other jobs. And so this is a person that her voice has probably been heard by more people visiting the Brooklyn Navy Yard than anybody. Carmela, she did she did her oral history back in 2008, but we did not get to meet her at that time. We did, however, get to meet her on her 90th birthday back in 2014. And so this is her with a couple of our colleagues, Doug and Sarah.
And her niece brought her for the 90th birthday, and it was the first time that she had heard her voice being played as part of the tour,
Right.
Which was really great. She was a total rock star on the tour, which is something we always love. Or when people come on the tour and they have their own personal stories about the site, we love to make space for them to just kind of be a rock star for the afternoon.
Yeah. So she's going to describe becoming a welder and what that was like.
They put us, like paired us in two to go into the shops. Mm-hmm. That was a big day when we walk in with all this gear, heavy, thick rubber things on our body, which I hated.
Oh, describe those to me.
Oh, it was like covered your whole body, almost like your upper body. Mm-hmm. And we wore work shoes we had to have. And then they gave us these shields you put on your head. Mm-hmm. Of course, you got to weld with the shield. And we were told, once we started welding, that you had to drink milk every day because of the fumes,
Oh, I haven't heard that. Yeah. So why milk?
It was good for your lungs because you were breathing in, as you're welding, you're breathing in those fumes.
Right.
So I did that for about a year. And then my father said, enough is enough, because he'd see the burns on my arms because I wouldn't wear those things on. I couldn't stand them. You're dying with the heavy rubber on your body.
Right.
So then I get a job in the office.
That's another theme that comes up in a lot of these oral histories, is just how hot it was, even in the middle of winter. You're just like hot all the time in these, heavy, canvas and leather and rubber, work garments, whether you're a ship fitter or a welder or a cutter, doing any of these jobs. Most of the jobs are being done outside, at least at some point. And even if you're inside, the buildings don't really have air conditioning in the Navy Yard. So that's another kind of this visceral kind of feeling. Another oral history that we don't have today, but you can actually listen to once the museum is open. It's on display in the museum.
Which is Building 92.
Which is Building 92, which is the historian Howard Zinn. And he talks about how they actually would give people salt tablets because you would lose so much salt from your body from all the sweating that you were doing. So again, this just kind of like visceral feeling of what it was like to wear these clothes.
And in Carmela's interview, we do see with some of these young women, she was 18 years old when she came to work in the yard. She was helping to support her 8 brothers and sisters, and her father was sick at the time. But she really remembers socializing and even going on dates with some of the Marines and the sailors. She went roller skating with them up near Ebbets Field and got ice cream on dates. And so she had it was a social outlet for her. She met a lot of people there and had enduring friendships that in some cases carried on throughout her life. So yeah.
Another thing I'll mention about Carmela, again, I wish we could play their whole clip, but it's so amazing because maybe we'll play this clip on September 2nd, because we're going to talk about the USS Arizona and the USS Missouri, both built at the yard. But she tells this story about watching the launching of the USS Missouri, and she says, they smashed the bottle into the ship and it slid down the shipways, and it had been a cloudy day, and then all of a sudden the sun came out, which, is a very dramatic telling. And you think, maybe that was embellished a little bit because it was such this, powerful moment to be part of. Then we heard 2 other people describe it the exact same way. And people who had just come on tours who had not heard that clip before, but they happened to be there and they mentioned that. So I love when those little details kind of come together from all these different perspectives. So now we're going to listen to Abraham Weintraub. One of the things I mentioned before was that, they started to really collect these oral histories in earnest, about 13 years ago, because we were losing so many people of this generation. And you'll hear from Abraham. He's going to tell you his birth date, which is pretty amazing. Abraham, unfortunately, is no longer with us, nor is Carmela. But he's going to talk about what it means to be a chipper. What is a chipper and a caulker? In this image here, you can actually see a woman doing this job, but she's using this pneumatic hammer. And so he's going to describe exactly what this person is doing.
Yeah, Abraham Weintraub. Okay.
And what's your date of birth?
2310.
2310?
10, yeah. 1910.
Describe to me the work that you were doing. What is a chipper and a caulker?
A chipper is taking a rivet and put, in other words, you put a rivet in the hole and you caulk it and you make it watertight. That was my job. In other words, on all the ships that I worked, I had to caulk all the on the Missouri. I caulked all the ships on the Missouri, made it watertight. In case it got hit by a bomb, it wouldn't leak so fast. I used to climb the steeples and caulk around up above on the big steeple. Sometimes they have a plate on top and they want to caulk. I would climb up about 40, 50 feet and caulk it.
Wow. Were you wearing a safety harness or ropes or anything?
You wear a safety a garment, a safety garment. And then you had a gun, you put the gun on your back and you rivet.
What was the safety garment like?
The safety garment was made out of hard, it's made out of hard cotton. Like, not cloth, but hard cotton.
Like a canvas?
Yeah.
And were you tied into anything? I mean, if you were to fall, was there something that would catch you?
No, I had to attach myself against the pole.
Oh, okay.
In other words, you had to attach you against the pole. In case you drop, they would catch you. I used to climb all on the Missouri. I climbed them all the way on top and way on bottom.
Wow. So was it scary at all, that part of the job?
No, you got used to it. You don't know any better, so you do it. That was riveting. Mm-hmm. Without rivets, you can't build ships.
Mm-hmm.
So he again says, you get used to it, just like Mimi saying, you get used to that sound. You go a little deaf and you get used to it. Yeah. So what he's describing is climbing up the scaffolding up the side of the ship as it's getting built. And he said, if you were going to fall, you just had to grab onto the pole, the scaffolding is what he's describing there. So not a whole lot of safety equipment to protect people.
And most of the ships were built kind of, if you know the Brooklyn Navy Yard, I know we have a lot of locals here, but the launchways, a lot of the ships were built up above ground on these shipways and then launched out into the water.
Yeah, exactly. So you're building them what's called the keel up construction. So speaking of which, we're going to talk about the laying of the keel of the USS Missouri. So basically, you can see all this scaffolding in the background here. You're basically building the ship on a big ramp, and then you're building it up, and they use the scaffolding, as cranes and things like that to move pieces into place. And then once the hull is complete, you release the supports and it'll slide down the rails into the water. But from this moment here of the keel laying to the moment that they were, that the ship was launched was about 3 years for the USS Missouri. And we're going to hear from Clayton Colefield in a moment. We have a question here, which is what exactly is going on in this photo? So this is the kind of ceremonial keel laying. And what they're doing is you have the big wigs here at the Navy Yard. They are turning these cranks, which turn on the pneumatic hammer, which puts in place the first rivets to basically rivet the first two keel plates together. So it's sort of this ceremonial procedure. But we're going to hear from the person who actually put those plates into place and actually did the work, didn't just show up for a photo op. And that's Clayton Colefield. And Clayton is actually someone who I didn't get the chance to meet him, but a couple of years ago, a number of his relatives came on a tour and talked about him.
And just a little bit background on him. He was originally from Jamaica, the island, not the neighborhood in Queens, to an English father and a Spanish mother. And he had their family kind of settled in the Bronx. And then during the Great Depression, he really struggled to find work. And so when he heard that the Brooklyn Navy Yard had opened up opportunities for work in 1940, he was eager to apply.
Yeah, so he started working there before Pearl Harbor. And so he worked on the USS Missouri, which was the predecessor, the USS Iowa, which was the predecessor to the Missouri, as well as working on the Missouri. And he continued to work at the yard, through the 1960s as well.
We had put applications in all over the place. Many of the aircraft factory used to stand in line about 5 deep trying to get a job at the time.
Wow.
And my friends and myself put a application in the Navy Yard. And then one day I got home and there was an application come down to the Navy Yard to work there. That was driving from the Bronx to Brooklyn every day. Mm-hmm. So when I went down to the Navy Yard, I was employed and a friend of mine also. And then they put us out to where do we want to work and what type of work do we want to do. And they said, well, I would like to work on a ship, I said, building the ships. Mm-hmm. And as being I had a good experience in high school with mechanical drawing, I was able to read the blueprints and nobody else could read the blueprints. So then they put me in charge of a group of guys, after a few months. And I learned the work to do that on the ships. So we worked on the Iowa when it was almost finished, and started the Missouri. I guess it was around in 40s or 42. I forget now the exact date. Mm-hmm. But by the time I started to work on the ship, I was an instructor at first, and then they made me a supervisor. Then after that, down the line, I became a supervisor, or what they call a quarterman ship fitter. Mm-hmm. So I had maybe 120 men and 10 supervisors under me. So it was dangerous work, and nothing you picked up was under 50 pounds. So
Wow.
well, you had good physical opportunities there. So anyhow, my arms used to look like Popeyes, if you know how Popeye was the cartoon.
Yes.
Okay, but I was pretty husky at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we finished up the Iowa, and then they started the Missouri. And I was there, and with my crew, we put down the first keel plate on the ship. And then from there on, we worked. My crew worked on different parts of the ship until it was finished.
So here you can see down here where these guys are standing. That's the keel plate that he's talking about. So they're the ones who actually put it in place. And so a ship fitter is basically they're the ones who are putting the different pieces in place and making sure they fit together. And then they might be riveted and or welded together. So that's what a ship fitter does: make sure everything fits in place. Pretty logical. So we talked about the kind of the big jobs of actually putting the whole ship together. I wish I had a picture here, but we love this clip because it shows one of the very smallest jobs of building a ship like the USS Missouri, which Frank Sirgusa did. And he was very young. He's 16 years old when he started working at the yard.
Yeah. He had dropped out of school and he was trying to convince his father to let him enlist in the Navy. And since his father wouldn't let him do that, he was able instead to get this apprenticeship job at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And he did this for about 6 months. And then he did end up serving in the Navy eventually for about 4 years.
In 1944, I asked my father, to sign me into the Navy. I was only 16, but he wouldn't do it. So I did the next best thing. I quit school and went down and applied to the Navy Yard to work, so I could work, with on the ships, meet the sailors, etc., etc. Now, the kind of work they gave me was painting. And I realized they told me to be very careful. I remember that. And wear gloves because it was lead paint. They sent me to someone who was a trompe-l'oeil painter because in the on the bridge on the ships, I guess the captains would ask for some kind of fancy wood-like painting. That's what trompe-l'oeil is. I guess it wasn't called trompe-l'oeil at that time, but my wife was an artist, so she would, and that's how I've learned it, and my daughter also. So I learned about trompe-l'oeil. And then I remember that's what I was doing. I would put in the flat coats or whatever else he asked me to do, and then he would do the fancy stuff.
So if you're not familiar with trompe-l'oeil, it's just a term that means, painting. Trick of the eye. Yeah, trick of the eye. It's optical illusion painting. So what he was doing is basically painting fake wood paneling, on the bridges of the ships, or maybe in the officers' quarters, places like that. So he's doing this, learning to do this very, kind of detailed, fine work. But I'm sure not every ship got trompe-l'oeil painted, quarters, but maybe some of them did. So yeah, this is little tiny detail. I love that. All right, so you can see this is me here with one of the people who came on a tour. This is Jack Friedman. Jack actually visited us all the way from Wales with his wife and two of his sons. And he actually came as part of a program through the British National Lottery. So they have a program where you can apply if you were served in World War II, and they'll send you, all expenses paid, to a place that you served. And so Jack had the opportunity to go to Singapore because he actually participated in another one of the surrenders, which was the Japanese forces surrendered in Singapore. but he also came to the Brooklyn Navy Yard because this is a place where he had served. He was actually sent over again before Pearl Harbor to pick up a ship that was being refit at the Brooklyn Navy Yard that was being loaned to the British. And so while he was in New York, he talked about being able to go out on the town, and they gave, free tickets to service members to see different shows. And he's going to talk about one of the shows he went to that made him very upset what he saw there.
I came in, used to come ashore, and I remember we used to come into Times Square and around there. In Times Square, there was a kiosk which supplied free tickets that were supplied to them for the theatres that had them in the square, and they were handed out to servicemen. Didn't matter if they were British or American. There weren't many British. The only British servicemen there were the Navy and the Merchant Navy, and a lot of Americans. So I got tickets to the show. The point I'm making is that the Queen Elizabeth, or Queen Mary, I mean, was a target. It was a fast ship, but it was a target, and its movements should be kept secret. But during the show, they announced from the stage that the captain of the Queen Mary was in the audience, which was told the people that the Queen Mary was there. But of course, nothing ever happened to it because it was too fast.
So he's describing the Queen Mary, which was a passenger liner that the British had converted into a troop ship. So as a normal passenger liner, it could carry about 2,000 people. As a troop ship, it could carry about 15,000. And it could make the crossing from New York to the British Isles in a little over 4 days. So it was this incredibly valuable military target. And so obviously this was, before, I believe right before the U.S. Formally entered the war. And so he was, very upset by this, that they revealed, that the Queen Mary was in town, or the captain. I mean, you could just also walk down to 48th Street Pier and see it there. Yeah, so obviously the British up to this point had suffered greatly from German submarines in the Atlantic, and of course in early 1942 the Americans would get a taste of it as well. But speaking of which, the next one we're going to listen to is an American, and she describes what it was like her mother driving an ambulance at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and you'll see how it relates to Jack's story.
At that time, my mother began to drive an ambulance, and I went with her, and she had a friend, Kathleen. I don't remember Kathleen's last name, but she and my mother drove the ambulance, and they drove it to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, where mostly British ships came in. The British ships came in with wounded, and when you saw the British sailors, you couldn't tell what color they were because they were covered with oil. Oh. You didn't realize it until you could smell it. You could smell the oil, because a lot of them were torpedoed, and what they liked us to bring, and my mother used to get boxes of it, something called charms, which were hard candies, because it would take the taste of the oil out of their mouth.
Yeah, so this is a picture. This is actually of an American Coast Guardsman aboard a ship called the USS Menzies, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But the image is probably similar. If there were ships being torpedoed, not far outside New York Harbor, or even if they were torpedoed farther away, it wasn't like they had many places that they could go and get cleaned up, especially if they were wounded. So a lot of ships would be limping into New York Harbor, to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and other shipyards as well, and they had to treat these sailors.
And this is why, I mean, oral history is so important, you know, in telling the story, both that during World War II, the press wasn't necessarily covering sort of troop movements or ships coming in and out. And then these kinds of details about what the human experience is like, and what Shirley Ann Dreamer witnessed as a child riding along with her mother.
Yeah, that's a really great point about press censorship, in that, you know, if you just look at the official records, if you just look at the press coverage, you get this very circumscribed view of the war. And so it's really, really important that we get these human stories to understand, you know, what it was like. So we just have a couple more clips here. So we're going to kind of move into the latter stages, 1945, and really the end of the war, and what impact that had on people. Hermann Domback is a person I interviewed a few years ago over the phone. I believe he passed away a couple of years ago as well. But he was someone who worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yard for a couple of years as a very young man. He became a machinist's apprentice, and he actually got deferred a couple of times because he was a skilled worker, and then his number came up, and so he was sent off. He actually spent the war in the Panama Canal Zone. But then when he came back, you know, he was entitled to a job. So if you basically served, you were entitled to a federal job, and if you'd worked at the Navy Yard before, you could come back and work at the yard. And so that was part of the reason why we said it was really, you know, last in, first out, with women and African Americans and other minorities who had gotten these new opportunities. But basically the federal government had promised way more jobs to service members than they could actually give them. And so Hermann talks about something, again, by no means is this in like the official records, but this was his understanding of how they dealt with this tricky situation of promising way more jobs than they actually had places for.
The government guaranteed all the servicemen, whoever had a job, when they came out, they would have a job again, that they had to hire you again. So what the Brooklyn Navy Yard did to get around it, they had a sub place in Bayonne, New Jersey. So if they saw that you lived in Manhattan, let's say, they told you can get your job back if you want to travel to Bayonne, New Jersey. If you worked in Bayonne, New Jersey, they told you to have a job for you in Brooklyn Navy Yard. So very few people wanted to move away and relocate because it was ridiculous. Just no future in it. Who knows how long they're going to hire you? And they stopped. As soon as the war was over, they stopped all production, everything else. Ships were half finished. They just stayed there until they cleaned them out. Everything was like you shut the faucet off. That's the way it stopped at the end of the war.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, and this is something I talk about. I tell this story and play this clip on a lot of my tours. I think it's so interesting that, you know, they had this conundrum and this is how they dealt with it. So the picture you're seeing here is the Brooklyn Navy Yard Annex in Bayonne. But you know, people like Hermann and a lot of the other men who had worked in the Navy Yard, you know, they could go get other jobs, places they learned a skill. There were lots of other shipyards. There were lots of places hiring. So they could go and find a job pretty easily. The last clip we're going to play is of people who didn't have that same opportunity. And this is a couple of women, Ida Pollock and Sylvia Everett. So they were in the very first cohort of women to come and work in the yard in the summer of 1942.
Well, industrial jobs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the first female production workers. Thank you. And so they were let go in 1945, and they described, for Sylvia and then Ida, are going to describe what it was like, you know, trying to get a job in the private sector, welding, which is the skill that they had learned.
Well, I tried to find a job after I had left the Navy. You know, I'm jumping ahead. I'm married and I went up to Boston. I spent a long time trying to find a job, and they all thought I came from some insane asylum.
Yeah.
They looked at me like I was a total lunatic. You're going to weld? That's funny.
But one time when I lived up in Troy for a while, there was an ad in the newspaper for a welder. And just for the hell of it, I called. And there was dead silence on the other end.
They weren't interested.
No, they weren't interested.
So I'm just going to share here. So that other voice that you heard there at the very end of the clip, that was actually Jennifer Egan. So we're just about out of time. If anyone has any questions or comments,
or
please,
stories that you'd like to share,
please feel free to drop them into the chat while we're wrapping up here. But we just want to give a big thanks again to all of the people that really made this collection possible. It's really been a team effort over the last several years. We have someone here who has something
to share
that you'd like to share.
Okay.
Ricky, we'll see here.
He's at the top. There we go.
Okay. Ricky, we're going to bring you on here if you have a story that you want to share.
It's going to be your audio.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. My phone just started ringing at the same time. Sorry. So my father, this must be a familiar story. My father was deaf in one ear, and he couldn't join the Navy, but he worked for the Navy Brooklyn Yard. And I actually went on a wonderful tour a few years ago. But he went back and forth to Groton, Connecticut to build submarines. Now, I don't know if that was a common thing. He was educated. He had gone to Columbia. He owned a business, but he worked at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and then traveled back and forth. Did you ever hear of that before?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Brooklyn Navy Yard had an entire division that was overseeing private shipyards. So they were basically overseeing the naval construction jobs that were being done by different contractors. So, typically that was in the immediate New York area. So whether it was in Red Hook or in Sunset Park or, over in Kearny, New Jersey, places like that. But yeah, I imagine that Electric Boat up in Connecticut was also in their remit.
So my question, I was curious, how did he get there? Did they provide transportation back and forth? Groton is a few hours away from Brooklyn.
Yeah, I mean, he could have taken the train. You can take the Amtrak right to New London. That would be my guess, or maybe he drove. Do you know if? Because I imagine he would go for overnight.
He had a very broken down car that I don't think could have taken him there. I don't know, was Amtrak around in the early 40s?
Yeah, there was a train. Yeah, there was a train
Okay.
that wasn't called Amtrak, but yeah, he took the New Haven Railroad. Yeah.
Because I was curious why they would take people from the Navy Yard who were working there and have them work on the submarines, unless that was more skilled somehow, or they didn't have the people.
Yeah, and it was also just, again, maybe he was overseeing. The Brooklyn Navy Yard played this kind of supervisory role for the other shipyards in the area.
And the Brooklyn Navy Yard, correct me if I'm wrong, but submarines, that wasn't a focus in terms of the World War II period.
Yeah, that's another thing, is we didn't really build or repair very many submarines or any submarines during World War II. So it's possible
at the
Brooklyn Navy Yard. So it's possible maybe he had particular skills that they needed up there that weren't as necessary in Brooklyn.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I loved the tour when I went for it for real, and I can't wait to go back again. But this was very wonderful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We loved having you here.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. We have a message down at the bottom here too. Is there anyone else that has a question or would like to share their own story? I have to say, this is probably one of the most rewarding, this is maybe the most rewarding part of our work, is getting to meet all of these people, both historically and today, that have connections to the places where we give tours, and the Brooklyn Navy Yard with the hundreds of thousands, maybe even more, of people that have worked there over time. It's a place of meaning to so many people in different ways. And we hope that we helped kind of share that with you today.
Yeah.
There's many more oral histories that have been collected through the years that are in the Brooklyn Navy Yard's collection, and some of them are also at the Brooklyn Historical Society, as Andrew mentioned at the top of the
So just
program.
a little bit more about the collections, if you're interested in exploring these more. It's sort of a joint collection. So we at Turnstile Tours, we've collected a number of them and placed them in the Brooklyn Navy Yard's archive. The Brooklyn Navy Yard, as their staff have done recordings as well. And then, of course, the Brooklyn Historical Society has sort of lent their collection to the Brooklyn Navy Yard archive. Making these all available is an ongoing process. It's a very long process to make sure everything is digitized and made available online. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like in the future. There's initiatives both by the Navy Yard as well as by Brooklyn Historical Society to make it at least a large portion of the collection available. But it's going to be a little while, and obviously everything is up in the air with COVID. So hopefully we want to make more and more of these available as possible. One thing I want to mention is something called the Homefront Project, and we'll share a link on our website after this, which is really trying to become sort of a clearinghouse where all these different World War II oral history projects, specifically about the home front, are being put on this website. And so the Brooklyn Navy Yard is a partner of that project as well. And so a selection of them are available on that site, as well as ones from other sites all around the country and different cultural institutions. So that's a really great thing to check out. Again, I just want to give a big thanks to obviously all of the contributors and their families who have shared their stories, been so generous with their time, and really, created this amazing archive for posterity. But also want to thank all of the institutional partners and staff who help facilitate a lot of these oral histories and bring this together. So that includes all of our friends at the Brooklyn Historical Society, everybody at the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation, including all the past archivists as well as the current team there today. And give special thanks to Jennifer Egan as well for really, with her book project helping to kickstart a lot of this. And then of course, Daniela Romano, who was the driving force behind creating this archive and creating the museum and visitor center and the tour program at the Brooklyn Navy Yard.
And Sadie Sullivan,
Yes.
whose voice we heard in so many of these
Yes,
clips. She
yeah.
conducted a lot of the interviews as the oral historian of BHS in 2007, 2008, 2009, kind of that stretch of time.
Yeah. So again, we'll be sharing more about this. And for any of our virtual programs, if you want to find the resources that we mentioned in the program, just go back to our website and the event page will have all those links listed on it. So we'll put that stuff up there. We hope you'll join us for our next program. Our next two programs are also going to be free, and we want to get as big an audience as we can. So on August 18th, we're going to visit Grandchamps at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Cindy's going to interview Judd Grandchamps and learn about Haitian food at Building 77. And then on the 19th, we're going to talk to Howard Goldstein, who is the forest ecologist for Prospect Park. We're going to talk about paper dolls in the coming weeks. We're going to talk about the Battle of Brooklyn and the Revolutionary War. And then September 2nd, we're going to kick off a whole series of more programs related to the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. So thank you all so much.
And we'll hear a few oral histories.
Yes.
Like as we
Yes.
share those programs, there'll be more oral histories to come.
Yes.
And if you know anyone who was a defense worker, whether at the Brooklyn Navy Yard or the Brooklyn Army Terminal, whether in World War II or even in the Cold War period, we'd love to speak with them and capture their story.
Yes, we're really, we're putting a focus this year on trying to get more stories of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and even the 80s too. So if people have connections to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, please feel free to reach out to us. Oh yeah, one last thing. We have a comment here that my father worked on the repair of landing craft. He was a welder who wore asbestos garments and died many years later after asbestos poisoning.
Yes,
Yes.
we have heard about this.
We'll take a moment because this is something that comes up a lot in the oral histories. I mean, it's mentioned so many times about asbestos used for everything.
For mats, like at lunchtime, people would sit on mats in their shops. We've heard that in an oral history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously working in the shipbuilding industry, asbestos was a huge part of that. And, you know, so many people, you know, lost their lives prematurely from being exposed to that. So that's something that unfortunately comes up a lot. And if you just Google the Brooklyn Navy Yard, you're going to find a lot of links about, you know, mesothelioma. And, you know, there was a whole series of lawsuits, you know, way back when. You know, today, we don't really have to deal with that anymore. But it's definitely part of our history, part of our legacy, unfortunately.
I mean, it even reminds me of like the Howard Zinn story about the jewelry making, where people were making jewelry with cadmium, which has, they were using,
which is radioactive.
Yeah, which is radioactive, but people didn't know this at the time.
Some of you, I know we're way over time, but this, thank you for people for bringing up these other issues. Some of you may have heard that Dead Horse Bay, which is in South Brooklyn, it's a famous beach because there's a landfill that is breached and it sort of spills all this garbage out onto the beach. But it's, you know, it's pre like 1950, so there's no plastic in it. It's mostly glass that's in there. So you can find all this beautiful glass on the beach there. That was recently closed because they discovered, oh yeah, this is from Dead Horse Bay. Anyway, they closed the beach to the public because there was radiation was detected there, and it was due to they found a number of these markers, these kind of day glow markers that they used to put on the deck of ships, and they glow because they were painted with radium. And so radium used to be used a lot in producing all sorts of different products, but especially for the military. On ships and on airplanes, they would use radium paint to make the dials glow in the dark, so that you could see them. There's a movie that just came out called Radium Girls, which is about, you know, people getting sick from working with radium, painting watch faces. So anyway. I will say this though, and it's something I mention on my tours all the time, is that it could be a lot worse. One thing that we're very lucky about with the Brooklyn Navy Yard is that we never built or repaired nuclear powered vessels. And so as a result, you know, compared to a lot of the peer shipyards, like for example, the Hunters Point Naval Shipyard in San Francisco, which has huge problems with radiation contamination. We don't have those same environmental challenges at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. So while that was one of the reasons why they chose to shut down the Brooklyn Navy Yard on the one hand, on the other hand, you know, it's allowed it to continue to be this kind of thriving place because we don't have to deal with those major, you know, environmental catastrophes of radiation. So we're gonna end it there. So please come and join us for our future programs. Please consider becoming a member of Turnstile Tours. You know, we're going to keep doing these virtual programs for the foreseeable future. But if you become a member too, once we're back to giving tours live and in person, we're going to be doing special, you know, members only programming and discounts and things like that. So.
And we do plan to start rolling out slowly some outdoor tour programs, in-person tour programs with social distancing measures in place and masks and all of that. So stay tuned to our newsletter.
Yeah, and sign up for our newsletter as well. So thanks so much, everybody, and have a great day.